Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Ins and Outs with Lynne and Liam. Today we got another stellar articles for y'all, and I'm gonna go first this week. And my article is called 3 Reasons. Sorry, I'm pulling it up real quick. I should have had this ready. 3 reasons why you need to talk to your teens about sexual pleasure. And so they talk about how a lot of the talk we do about sex in school is heteronormative, about how all the education people get, it's kind of like biased towards like heterosexual people in general, and it like discounts queer sexual pleasure and things like that. And so the author gives us 3 ways. She actually does it in a talking to your kids about pleasure one, which I found really interesting. That like it's not even like this is what kids need to learn in school. She was like, this is how you need to talk to your kids about sexual pleasure, which very interesting. And so her 3 tips are: think about how you define sex and if the way you define sex is limiting. So how do you define sex? Do you define it as my dog's moving? Do you define sex as like foreplay part of sex? Do you define sex as just like penis and vagina? Do you define sex as just like oral sex? So how do you define sex, and is that like heteronormative or is that more inclusive? One study she pointed to when defining sex was this one done by a Canadian researcher that said 11% of respondents didn't consider sex unless the dude came. So unless the guy ejaculated, it wasn't real sex, which I think is very heteronormative and very like cis male heteronormative.
So 1 out of 10, wait, 1 out of 10? Is that, so 11%?
11% would be, yeah, like a little around 1 out of 10, yeah.
That's bonkers.
Yeah, which when I was a kid, I actually had this conversation with somebody about whether or not it was real sex if he didn't finish. So yeah, it's not just like these people. It's like I've had this conversation before. But the other study that I thought was crazy was 18% of men over 65 responded that it wasn't real sex if they were wearing a condom.
Whoa, 1 out of 5.
1 out of 5, yeah, almost 1 out of 5. Yeah,
that's bonkers.
Yeah, I was like, dang, like that's a lot of people not thinking they're having sex because they have a condom on.
I mean, it is safer, but it's still sex.
But it's definitely still sex. And like this person, they describe sex fairly inclusively, maybe even more inclusively than I define sex oftentimes, because they define like foreplay as sex. They say like kissing can even be considered part of sex, which maybe a little bit, I don't really include that, but I also don't always know how to define foreplay, right? Like, is making out foreplay or is that just making out?
Joe, that's a really good question. We went to the sex ed conference. Did you go to that workshop about like how do we establish what sex is? Were you at that workshop?
I don't think so.
I thought you were, because I thought we talked about it, but maybe you weren't. But so it was all these sex educators in the room, and the whole theory was like, we can't teach sex ed if we don't have like a base agreement on what sex is. And so there's like 100 of us in the room, and like the variations, some people said like touching nipples was sex, some people said making out was sex. And so I was just like, holy moly, like the variations of like people who are experts in the field, although I don't know, experts, I have like that imposter syndrome, but I personally do not count making out as sex.
Yeah. So I do remember being in that class with you, because I remember me and you even having different definitions of what sex is.
Well, and personal definitions and then professional definitions, right? Yeah. So like I might not count oral sex as sex, but professionally I would.
Yeah.
And then I think a lot about it, it's like a lot of stigma related to it, because if you do count making out as sex, then when somebody says, how many people have you had sex with, Liam? You have to include all those people. And like when you're a woman, right? If you have to tell people that you've had sex with, I don't know, however many people you made out with, then there's like all this stigma of being a woman who's like got too many body on their count.
Yeah, your tape is just running low.
Yeah, life's tough when you're a woman.
It truly
and you're
is.
making out with people.
Yeah. So think about how you define sex and whether or not you define it inclusively.
Well, oh wait, I have something to add to that too.
Yeah.
I think we think about it a lot, but if we're like the people we're excluding, like, so if we're talking about virginity as like P and V, penis and vagina, or penis and anus sex, then you're like saying that women who only have sex with women unless they use sex toys, like they're virgins for their whole life.
Yeah.
Like, it's really an inconsistent theory that we have to really work out.
Yeah, I mean, most of these theories are associated with cis men, right? People who have penises. And this article focuses a lot about like how our idea of pleasure and idea of sex is focused a lot on cis men, not even just hetero cis men, but also hetero cis men. And they're like right to get off. And they're like, their power, or what is it called? Like, what's that called? Not preference. What the heck's that P word? Privilege.
Like
they're privileged to get off all the time.
Privilege. Yeah. No, it's true. Like, in the universe, sex ends when the penis comes, and everything we talk about is penis related.
Yeah. And even like, I try really hard to make my sex ed like inclusive and like pleasure focused. But even like, I think back on my sex ed classes I taught, and I think like I need to like switch up some of the stuff I do. But it can be really difficult because, a lot of people are having heterosexual sex. So it is something we really have to focus on, but we can't like exclusively focus on it. We have to like be able to find a way to kind of melting pot it all.
Right. Plus, we've been invited there to talk about like pregnancy prevention. And so a lot of times, you don't want to like rock the boat too much by being too controversial.
Yes, definitely.
I did notice the other day, so Liam, you and I talked together the other day, and we were talking about masturbation. And I did notice, and I'm guilty of this, this is one of the notes that I made for me personally, that we talk about masturbation only almost exclusively as like penis people. Like, oh, here are the rules of masturbation. Don't hurt your penis, don't do it in public, whatever. But we never really talk about female masturbation. And you mentioned it, and I was like, oh, I'm going to make a note of that. Like, I need to be better. Because if you think about it, like, lots of females masturbate.
Oh, definitely. But even like, so I mention it, right? But even the way I mention it is like in a cis straight male way. Because like, it's on my slide that talks about erections. So I'm talking about erections, and I'm like, it's okay to like, masturbate and touch your erection. And then I say like, it's not just guys who masturbate, but it's still on the slide with a freaking penis on it. So I try to be inclusive, but even that like isn't all that inclusive.
Right, it's like the afterthought.
Yeah. So I definitely, this article brought up a lot of points that I'm like, you know what, I do have to like think about ways to make my sex ed even better. So the second thing she said that we have to talk to our kids about is, do you place importance on certain people's pleasure? So a lot of times we place more importance on like the male's partner's pleasure, especially like, I guess, so I'm not a young female woman in high school, so I can't 100% be on this or whatever. But the argument is that young women oftentimes put more pleasure on on pleasuring their sexual partner. So women are much more likely to go down on their sexual partner than men are. Women are much more likely to like be like okay with not having a pleasurable sexual experience, not talking about it. And even like on movies, they mentioned in the article that like if a female has an orgasm on a movie, it's rated R, but if a male has an orgasm, it's rated PG-13. And male orgasms are almost like comedy sometimes.
Yeah. I also think that like some of the ways we talk about sex is like,
oh, you froze.
Painful. Am I frozen?
You're back.
Did I freeze for a second? I'm sorry. Did I unfreeze? Okay. Some of the way we talk about sex for females is like painful, like I'm gonna beat up those walls, break your back, like all of these things. And it's like none of this is, I mean, maybe it is, maybe you want your walls beat up, but like the way we talk about it is like so aggressive towards the person with the vagina, and so like, because I'm gonna have the best sex of my life, I'm gonna like pound you or whatever. And like that's possible, it's pleasurable, but it's like fully male penis centered.
Oh yeah.
And we're just supposed to be okay with that.
And like, do young women have even the ability to be like, yo, you were hitting it too hard. Like, I did not like you being off my guts. That did not feel all that great.
I didn't mean to make that face. I just find the thought of guts to be kind of gross.
Yeah, I mean, but like, you're right. Like, we do talk in a very like violent way about like smashing, destroying, all these kind of things.
Yeah, I do like that when we talked the other day, we talked about like how penis size doesn't matter because vaginas aren't like endless holes to like accommodate penis size, and neither are anuses. But like, that's the other thing. It's like, oh, I've got this big penis and I'm going to do this to you. And it's like, the vagina is only getting so big here, my friend. And so I always love to call people out on that. It's like, so, and your point, like, I got like really long fingers. Like, that doesn't do anybody any good, right? Like, who cares how big anything on your body is?
Yeah, definitely. And also, like, I don't know. Like, yeah, it's just, guys always think that like what feels good to them is obviously going to feel good to whoever they're doing it to. So like you know, my penetrative sex, obviously it's going to feel good for you because it's feeling good for me. But in reality, it doesn't. And so we have to like, you know, talk about that with kids and give them like the idea that like you don't have to accept that as like the only way to get pleasure. And it brings us on to the third point, which is thinking of pleasure in the context of consent. And so because so many young women and people in general, queer kids too, they kind of accept this like, you know, this idea of like not having great sex as okay. And then it kind of throws into this whole like consent thing. Like I'm consenting to having mediocre sex, or the sex I just had wasn't all that great, but I don't know how to talk about it because I consented to it or whatever.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Well, and like when you teach kids, you're like, you should check in with your partner, right? Ask them, does it feel good? Or I want to F you or whatever. But like, and their response is always like, you want me to say what? And it's like, yeah, I want you to ask them if this feels good. Like, don't you want to know?
Yeah.
Also, if you're butt naked with somebody, you should be able to say like, do you like this dick? Or whatever the phrase is you want to use.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And like, I always tell kids, I'm like, you can say it in like a sexy way. Like, I obviously can't say these kinds of things like in class when I'm teaching you, but you can use like whatever slang terms you need to. And you can also just like use moaning as like a way to express to your partner how good things feel, right? Like, you can say things like, oh yeah, like moan about something, and they know, oh, awesome, they like that. Yeah, and so after reading this article, and so I actually picked this article because I was talking to you about this earlier. I had a class on Wednesday that I was teaching that these kids asked about like pleasuring their sexual partners, and I gave them some like information. But then like afterwards, I was thinking about it, and I get questions about like sexual pleasure all the time. And I always say my programs are really inclusive, and my programs are like sexual pleasure focused and things like that. But even like when I talk about sexual pleasure, it's usually like, here's the anatomy of the vulva, here's the clitoris, this is where women get their sexual pleasure from. Which definitely, like, I think it's important for everybody to kind of learn that. But I don't talk about like all this other sexual pleasure we can get, like, you know, biting your ears, or like, what are those called? I can't remember the name anymore.
Erogenous zones.
Erogenous zones, yeah. And so like, I'm like, I never talk about erogenous zones. I never talk about how like, yeah, you like girls, like, so let's say again, a heterosexual couple, right? They might think, like the dude might think, oh, she likes it when I play with her breasts and I like playing with her breasts, but he doesn't think it's okay for his chest to be played with or his nipples to be like tweaked. But that's a really like sensational part of people's bodies. And so I think like I'm going to increase like my pleasure education where I talk about these zones on people's bodies and how important it is to kind of like explore each other's bodies in more than just a penetrative sex kind of way. And you can do it alone. You can do it when you masturbate too. You don't have to do it with your partner. You can explore your own body by yourself and figure out what parts of your body you love.
Yeah, I wonder how we could implement that better with like the restrictions of school.
Yeah, no, I don't often follow restrictions. I just kind of do whatever I do, and then they tell me afterwards if it's okay or not.
I know, I like that about you. But I do think because I agree, sometimes kids will ask you like a technical question about sex that is like about pleasure. And like my response is like, I can teach you about sex and about safe sex, but I can't really teach you tips. And so I feel like pleasure goes into like providing tips, but like, why can't I teach them?
Yeah, I always get like kids will be like, well, how do you masturbate? And I'm always like, oh, like I can't, like how do I like, you like grab it, like I don't know exactly what to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Especially when there's another teacher in the room who doesn't know you, like,
yeah,
it's like a really uncomfortable situation.
yeah, when it's like middle school kids.
Yeah, and like the teacher looks at you, like once I got in trouble for talking about anal sex, I didn't get in trouble, but there was like a conversation afterwards. And they thought like it was inappropriate. And it like kind of scared me out of, it made me think more about what the teacher in the room thinks about me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's not inappropriate. It's in the curriculum, and 1 out of 6 teenagers engage in it. So like, why wouldn't we talk about it? But
yeah, you know, I think me as like a queer kid, at least as a queer dude. So again, I think I have like a lot of male privilege even as like a queer guy, because like me and my sexual partners when I was a kid, we did like discuss what we like, and we like one of my first boyfriends, he loved his forearm to be played with. So like just like rubbing your fingers back and forth on his forearm, it like always got him in the mood. Or like afterwards when we were cuddling, he just like freaking went wild for it. And so I think we like, because of like my queer male privilege, like I was able to kind of like explore all these different pleasurable things you can do with each other. But I think like women oftentimes aren't given that same kind of ability. They're like told to be ashamed of their bodies. They rarely ever touch their own parts or look at their own parts or explore their own parts. And so they don't always learn, maybe not like in high school, what feels good. And they don't feel comfortable enough expressing that.
yeah, it makes me sad to think how much mediocre sex is being had. And then it makes me want to say like, oh, why even have sex as a teenager if it's just going to be mediocre? But like, you can't really say that.
Yeah, and not only mediocre. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The truth is most of it is, the most teenage sex is like mediocre to poor.
So not only is it mediocre to poor, I went through a couple articles trying to find like the one I wanted to present today. And one of the ones I read about teen pleasure and like, you know, learning about pleasurable sex was this one written by a doctor who she said that like 25 to 35% of the teens and young adults she sees who have vaginas have like torn vaginas or like fissures in their vaginas from like unlubricated sex and like unpleasurable sex. And most of them complain about not having pleasurable sex because they never taught how to have pleasurable sex. And so they have like not only unpleasurable sex, but like painful sex with like tearing and like damage to their vaginas.
Yeah, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. And so the final thing in her article was like how to talk to your kids, like how to bring it up to your kids. And she brings up the thing like talking to your kids about pleasure and about sex in general isn't going to make them have sex. Like 40% of kids have sex before they graduate high school on average in the United States. They're going to have sex, studies show, whether they have birth control, whether they have condoms, whether they've been talked about sex or not. And some studies even show that the kids who have talked about sex with their family members, or kids who have like a more open family that talks about sex and pleasure, are less likely to have sex in high school because they're not wondering about what it is. They know what it is and they don't need to experiment with it to find out what it is.
Right. I mean, that makes sense, right?
Yeah. Like you're curious, so you got to do it to find out what it is. If someone explains it to you, you're not going to be as curious.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but I can't.
I mean, there's nothing that you can analogize with sex, I feel like. It's just its own crazy beast.
No, but like when you're really looking forward to something, you'll do like something really weird or go out of your way to have it. It's like when they like release a Harry Potter book at midnight, right? Like, oh my God, I gotta go do this now. But if they just put it out like on a random Tuesday in the afternoon, it'd be like less thrilling because it's there.
It's not an event.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, I wonder, this is a magical thing. It's like, this is sex, and this is when you have it, it'll be good.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'll post this article, obviously. Definitely, I think everybody should read this. Educators should read this just so they can like think about how they're educating. But also like parents should read this. Think about how you're gonna talk to your kids about sex. All sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I thought it was very
Jay's
informative.
yelling downstairs, so I'm gonna shut my door real quick.
Okay.
Fine, what'd you say?
I thought it was very informative.
Yeah, definitely. I was really happy I found this one. I went through, like I said, I went through a few articles. All of them were great, but this one I thought was like the best.
Okay, so my article was from BuzzFeed,
You love
which,
BuzzFeed.
by the way, Liam made fun of me for picking BuzzFeed a lot, but I like BuzzFeed because I think it's like it's one of the most popular websites, right? And so, like, this is out there on the internet, and it's this woman on TikTok got pregnant without having sexual intercourse, and yes, it's possible. And so, apparently, on TikTok, there is now like a running joke and funny videos of this story of this person who says that they got pregnant without ever having sex. And it talks about the fact that there is a chance that if you engage in some sort of sexual behavior, so say like you're like mutually masturbating and semen comes out and then it's on your finger and then you finger yourself, or if it's on their finger and it goes in your vagina, you could become pregnant. And I picked this article, Liam, because it made me mad. Because I think that if you scare people too much with like, if everything is scary, if your chance of getting pregnant is like you're doomed no matter what, I think you'll be less cautious, right? So like if I know that, man, even if I try my best, holy heck, this woman got pregnant and all she did was masturbate her partner, then like why would it's not even worth it to try.
Yeah.
And so I find that this is like when people tell people like, oh, you could get an STD from a toilet seat. And it's like, I guess technically maybe there's like you'd have to be doing the weirdest thing on that toilet seat. But if we tell kids like toilet seats and whatever and sharing towels is how you get STDs, then like you're going to give up. It's a hopeless cause. And then people are just going to be behaving recklessly. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, we hear it all the time. People are like, oh, well, condoms like aren't 100% effective, so why even use them? And it's like, well, because they're pretty effective.
Right. I also just struggle. I'm not saying this person is not telling the truth, but it is incredibly rare, right?
Yeah.
It would have to be like, I'm not even sure how it would happen.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering too. Like, I was reading the article and I was like, I don't believe this happened, but I'm going to suspend my disbelief and then think about if it happened, how did it happen?
Right. And they would have to have like semen on their hand, and sperm is like microscopic, right?
Yeah.
So should we tell people to wash their hands after? I don't know. I found it unbelievable. And I found it frustrating.
So we know pre-cum doesn't have sperm in it. So it probably wasn't from pre-cum. However it happened, sperm got like on the person's hand. And when I do teach mutual masturbation is safer, but not 100% safe. And I do tell people when you're mutually masturbating, touching yourself next to your partner is super safe. Your partner touching you and not touching themselves is pretty safe. But going back and forth and touching each other's genitals with each other's hands is the least safest way to mutually masturbate.
Although it's still really safe.
And it's still really safe. And so like, I mean, like, yeah, like if you are jerking off your partner and they ejaculate on your hand and then you finger yourself with that ejaculate, obviously like that's not super safe. You're pushing sperm into your vagina. Like, so I don't really know like if like was she just not thinking that, or like.
Yeah, that's what is confusing, because it also doesn't seem like how the chain of actions would happen. I guess I don't know. I just found this to be like really incredible.
I did too. And then I was wondering like what sort of, so she said we've only had foreplay, right? Or like we've never like had penetrative sex. But what kind of foreplay, right? Like was he jerking off like onto her vagina?
Or was he like grinding his penis? Like
Yeah.
it's possible, right? Like they were like doing outer course,
Yeah.
and there was some humping going on.
Yeah, just like not like full out penetration, but like, you know, that just the tip kind of thing. If you're ejaculating just the tip, it's still like ejaculating.
Yeah, I mean, if there's ejaculate, there's ejaculate, period.
Yeah.
I do find it to be an opportunity to teach people about like media literacy and like believing things on the internet.
Oh yeah.
And so like I would use this as like a teaching tool to like try to, because you know people share all sorts of trash on the internet these days. The other day I saw, have you seen the implant one that's going around?
With like the arm like all jacked up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like
I
how
got a
it
story
got
about that.
lost and it took hours. And so many people sent it to me, or like they tagged me in it because they were like, is this true? Is this true? And it's like, that's highly unlikely. And it sounds like it's error on the doctor. You know, like if
Yeah.
you're like taking 4 hours to take that out, that's a doctor issue, not an implant issue.
So two things about that story, because I did see that story and I saw it posted by a friend of mine who I highly respect. I think she is super smart. And like we agree on like so many things, but she posted this article and she also posted her own experience with the implant. And she said that she was having so many negative side effects from it. She had her husband's father cut it out of her arm.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. I was like it took, I didn't want to fight with her because she's my friend, but it took like every ounce of my energy to be like, what are you talking about? Like how, like, what?
So you know, we supervise, we go in the clinics sometimes to shadow. And I did have somebody who was they worked in the medical field, and they told me they Googled, there's apparently YouTube videos on how to take it out yourself. And they thought about it, and I was like, well, I'm really glad that you thought otherwise. Because the truth is, like, have you seen them getting taken out, Liam?
Yeah, I've seen a few.
It takes 2 seconds. Like, you do a little cut, it comes out. Like, it's not traumatic in any way. But now this is all over the internet, and it's just not accurate.
And so one thing I do tell students, whenever like they bring up stuff like this to me, either about the implant or the IUD, like I'll have students be like, oh, I went to my gynecologist and they said they couldn't put my IUD in, or it took them like 30 minutes to an hour to put my IUD in. It was really painful and blah, blah, blah. I was like, look at y'all. If you go to like a regular gynecologist who puts in like one IUD every few months or an implant every few months, they're not going to be very good at it. But if you go to Planned Parenthood, where we are pumping these things out like a freaking, like every day we're putting like
it's our job, yeah.
several out. Yeah. We are like, not we, I don't do it, but the doctors and the nurses at Planned Parenthood are freaking experts at doing this thing. So if you go to someone who doesn't know how to do it, yeah, they might be digging around your arm trying to figure out how to pull it out because they've done it twice. But if you come to Planned Parenthood, where we do it every single day, all the time, we're experts at it. And we know how to do it really, really well, where you're not going to be having these traumatic experiences.
Right. Yeah. I wish that we were better at teaching people how to decipher accurate versus inaccurate. Or like, do you know the meme with the baby that came out with holding the IUD?
Yeah.
And it's like, what? Like, that's clearly not true. And the truth is there are side effects though, right? And so it's really doing a disservice because like there are side effects of the implant and they are valid and people have them. And I'm sure your friend did have like really bad side effects. And unfortunately, that's life as a vagina owner. Like, it's like Cinderella. You have to like try all those porridges. No, the 3 bears. You have to try all the porridge before you find the perfect porridge, right? And nobody tells anybody that. That's one of my other complaints. Like, nobody tells kids that it's going to take you trial and error to find the right birth control. They think it's like, I'm 15, I go to Planned Parenthood, I get my pill, and I am set for life, and everything's great. But the truth is, like, you might hate that. You might only like this a little, and then it takes time to like figure out what's right for you.
A lot of people talk about like, you know, when you first start birth control, you might spot a lot at the beginning. Like the implant, very common with that. But even with like the patch, very common to spot the first 3 months when you're on the patch. And like we just don't talk about it enough. I mean, also like we read all these like a lot of times we also associate side effects that are happening, especially in high school, to our birth control, even though it's not part of our birth control. Like whenever I talk about birth control, people are like, oh, well, it's going to make me fat. And I'm like, most studies show that birth control doesn't actually make you fat. But if you get it in high school and you gain weight in high school, we negatively associate that with our birth control. Or if we have these like negative emotional experiences in high school because we're crazy high school students, we're going to blame that emotion on our birth control or even on like our period. And it's not always that. It's just some like your high school student has crazy emotions without a fully developed brain. Like you just got, sometimes it's not your birth control.
Right. Especially the weight gain thing. And it's perfectly okay to gain weight, but like your body, your hips are getting bigger, your boobs are getting bigger, like everything is filling out. And also you teenagers eat like cheese fries and like hot Cheetos, you know what I mean? Like it's a combination, and like you might gain a few pounds in high school and that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's probably not to have to do anything with your birth control. But again, it's not to say birth control doesn't have side effects.
And if it does, then you're gonna have to go get something else. Like if you do gain 30 pounds and you can tell it's because of your birth control and you're unhappy about it, that's unfortunately life with a vagina. You have to go try something else. But I just don't put like, and so this woman with like her pregnancy, so now our kid's gonna think like, oh, what's the point? Because I can get pregnant from anything.
Maybe
I do like, Liam, that you don't tell kids. You and I do something which is not, I don't think, very common. We tell people you can't get pregnant from, that's highly unlikely you're going to get pregnant from pre-cum, because the truth is that like teenagers can tell when you're like kind of being full of baloney, and they can also handle information. And so like we can say, oh, you know, you're actually probably, it's less common to get pregnant from pre-cum, but here's why pulling out is not the best method. And they can understand that. But I think people just want to scare the heck out of people.
Oh yeah. I've gotten in trouble doing that before. I was in a health class one time and I was like, oh, so just so y'all know, like we're going through anatomy and talking about the cowper gland. I'm like, so cowper gland produces pre-cum. You can't get pregnant from pre-cum, or it's really unlikely to get pregnant from pre-cum unless there's already semen in your urethra or in your vas deferens that get pushed out. And one of the kids goes, oh, well, my health teacher, who's sitting right next to me, told me that pre-cum can get you pregnant. And I was like, oh, wow.
I mean, the truth is it's highly unlikely.
But yeah, I was like, it's not that they're lying. It's very unlikely. Sperm comes from your testicles. Pre-cum comes from the cowper gland. And I think like it's something we tell kids. And I don't even think people are lying. I think most people think that. They think like it's a fluid coming out of the penis. It obviously has a chance of getting you pregnant. And just, in reality, it doesn't.
Well, and they think that people behave best if they're scared.
Yeah, I mean, abstinence only education, right?
But I don't believe that that's true.
No, when I was a kid, I had the worst sex education because I went to a Catholic school. And in New York State, you can legally lie about sexual health. It's just, you're allowed to, which is stupid. And so the mandate is you have to have HIV prevention education, but it doesn't have to be factual HIV prevention education. So we had this dude come to my school who was like this like abstinence only like shock jock who would like jump around and like encourage abstinence. But he would say like all this crazy things like birth control will make you infertile. Having anal sex increased your chances of getting HIV because sperm destroys your immune system and the vagina knows a way to stop it, but the anus doesn't.
Whoa, our vaginas are magical.
They really are. They can stop sperm or something. I don't know. I didn't really get it. But I was like, this dude's just full of bullshit. And I would go home and I'd like ask my mom, like, Mom, like, is this true? Because like girls in my class would cry because he would be like, birth control is going to make you infertile, and they're on birth control to like decrease their period symptoms, and they're bawling, thinking they're not going to have kids anymore.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
I usually say I have the worst, but that one seems worse.
Abstinence only education, man, worst education ever.
And it's really doing a disservice because then people believe this stuff out here, which is like, oh, if my partner fingers me, I might get pregnant if there happens to be jizz on his hand, which is possible, but it's just highly unlikely.
Definitely. But I mean, also, like, if you jerk off your partner and there's jizz on your hands, don't push the jizz inside your vagina. Like, that just sounds like a bad idea. If you just think of the mechanics of getting pregnant.
Yeah. The other rumor that's similar is that people might take condoms out of the garbage and like insert the semen into their vagina. You hear that one a lot, right? Like, oh, I don't leave condoms behind. What if they take it? And it's like, what kind of Law and Order stuff are you on? Like, that's fantastical. That is unlikely to exist in real life.
Well, so this doesn't have to do with like getting people pregnant, because the kind of sex I have doesn't get people pregnant. But like when I was a kid, I always tied my condoms after I was done, just for like, I don't know, hygiene or something. And so as I do condom demos to this day, I always tie them at the end. And kids are like, oh, do you do that so like someone doesn't steal your cum? And I'm like, no. Why would I have sex with someone who I'm worried about stealing my cum? Like, who are you having sex with?
Also, who do you think you like? You have to have like a really hot, like, I like a good self-worth, but you have to like have a real high sense of self to think that somebody is like dying to make your baby.
Yeah.
I know. It's like Law and Order. It sounds like an episode of Law and Order. It might be an episode of Law and Order.
I mean, it's an episode on a lot of things. Like, Weeds had an episode about Silas poking holes inside his condom and getting his girlfriend pregnant. And people just make it seem like much more common than it is.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
If your partner gets pregnant, it's probably because you didn't store your condom properly.
Yeah, or you wore a magnet.
Right. Okay, Liam. Well, this was fun.
It was another great episode.
I'll see you next week. Everybody smash that like button or that subscribe button.
Yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Okay, bye.
Adios.